years ago, or 200 years ago, when the blacks were slaves, did they ever go to Washington, D.C. and have a rally 200 years ago to protest against slavery? Did they? No. What did they do? Well, a lot of good people in the plantations would say, hey, it's wintertime. Let us help build a church for you, dear folks. And they loved them and taught them how to read so they can read the Bible. And here's what the blacks did about 150 years ago. They humbled themselves. They prayed. They sought God's face and they turned from their wicked ways. And God made slavery illegal through several white presidents, right?
So that was a white Christian pastor. We're going to talk about what white Christian pastors still think about racism after nearly 50 years of the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And oh, by the way, not all, okay, but a lot. And this is so common, what you just heard from that Baptist preacher, that I'm going to say either they think this way or they are complicit, just kind of stand by and really say nothing. And that's funny because we hear, especially from the conservative side, that really it's the black people who are racist now. That white people, we're not racist. We've overcome. But then statements like this keep popping up. Statements like this keep happening. And that's not 200 years ago. That's today. That's recent. That's in this time. Now, I want to unpack that video that you just heard and to show you the logic. But before I do, let me do a quick history. Why are we still here? See that pastor right there? Why are we still here? Because again, he represents Christendom. He represents the Charlie Kirks, pastors who support Trump. See, they think like that. And I often say, we have to ask ourselves, why do white evangelicals support Trump? Why did they lionize Charlie Kirk at his death? And if you say, well, they are Christian leaders, are they? But how do we get there? Why is that mindset still there? Why do you still, well, how do you have a mindset in a nation? Let's kind of go back briefly. And if we were to say, let's just start with 1776. If you want to go back further, you can go back way further in American history. You can start with 1619 when the first slaves landed on this land. But let's start when the nation actually began, the 1776. From 1776 until 1865, some 70 years? How, when you start with a document that says all men are created equal. In fact, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident. Apparently not, but we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights from the Creator. So now how do you write that? The very person who wrote those words at the time of writing the words had slaves. So how do you start a nation with a lie? that you didn't believe. You had slaves. It didn't. All men were not equal. But I want to also say, what was the mindset? How do you think that? How do you think? How do you have that mindset? How do you condition America? Now, remember, you had slave owners. They had plantations. They had slaves. And what about the people that visit? What about the children that would look out their windows and step out on their porches and they would see all of the slaves? So what was the mentality? See, there was a conditioning of cognitive dissonance that this was okay. But not only that, but that it was God who ordained this slavery that was godly. You see, in order to have slaves, you had to condition their mind. You had to beat them down. You had to wear them down that their condition in order to accept their condition. And that was done through brutality. But it also damaged the white mentality. How do you watch this? Why do you watch the brutality? So then 1865 comes, the bloodiest war is fought, so the slaves are free. Now think about the mindset. Did the mindset change? You had 12 years of Reconstruction and then followed by 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. So you perpetuated the mindset. That Jim Crow segregation was instituted and enforced through terror. Terror of the white church, because remember, black folks could not go to white churches or colleges. The Klan would come from their night rides with their shotguns still smoldering, their ropes stained with blood untwined, as they would then go to church on Sunday morning. So what kind of mindset are we dealing with here? You had to be conditioned to say this was God. And then 1964, you had the passage of the Civil Rights Bill through much blood. In other words, they just didn't stop. It was blood, much blood. Now I'm saying this because remember when he says that the blacks humbled themselves. This guy almost looked like a cartoon character, right? Did the mindset change in 1964? But then you had also the Southern strategy. Nixon's Southern strategy, and one of his chief architects, Lee Atwater, spilled the beans. And basically what he said was, hey, there was a time when we would say N-word, N-word, N-word. You can't do that now. Now you have to use more colorful language. You have to use more framed language. And that's what we just heard with that video. You heard the Southern strategy at work, where you just make up stuff. And as they're doing now, trying to rewrite history, through the attempted dismantling of critical race theory, CRT, and now DEI. They're bad. White people good, but they're bad. And you know how many Baptist pastors are like him? They won't be as ignorant as he are. But you know what? When I see them post pictures of Charlie Kirk, honoring him, when I see them even post pictures of Charlie Kirk next to Martin Luther King, when you see white pastors of all denominations, of all independent churches, charismatic churches, see, again, perpetuate the same mentality, because let's just face it. The mentality was never changed. Laws were changed, but the mentality was never changed. Now let's unpack this video. We heard it, but now let's unpack it. Because again, you'll see the mentality, but you're going to see the Southern strategy mentality. He's not going to say the N word, or they used to, but you're not going to hear it. You're not going to hear the N word. But watch what you hear. Watch the twisting of truth. And that's an understatement. Here we go.
50 years ago, or 200 years ago, when the blacks were slaves.
So when he says 200 years ago, so what period of time is that? So if you say 200 years, you're going before 1865. Okay? All right. He said, so when the blacks were slaves, right off, you know where he's coming from. And right off, you know where he's going.
Did they ever go to Washington, D.C. and have a rally 200 years ago to protest against slavery? Did they? No.
Okay. So first of all, they couldn't just hop on a bus and travel to Washington, D.C. and have a I Have a Dream speech and a rally. They were slaves. They could not leave their plantation. Not the general, but every now and the general population, but those who had earned their trust and allegiance to their masters could leave the plantations, and they had to carry papers so that if a slave catcher approached them, he had to present those papers. Sound kind of familiar, huh? I won't get into the ICE thing. But again, all the way, look how silly this sounds, right? They couldn't have a rally. They couldn't just do things on their own. They were owned property.
What did they do? Well, a lot of good people in the plantations would.
Well, what good people is he referring to? A lot of the good people, now watch what he's getting ready to say. A lot of the good people, I don't know which good people he's referring to. Is he referring to the white good people? He must be, because watch what happens.
Say, hey, it's wintertime. Let us help build a church for you, dear folks.
A church? When did that happen? So in the wintertime, they build churches for the slaves. This is what this man is saying. In the wintertime, they're building churches for the slaves. It gets worse.
And they loved them and taught them how to read so they can read the Bible. And
again, that's absolutely not true. Black slaves were not taught to read. And it became worse when Nat Turner, who was a slave and also a preacher, learned how to read and led a revolt. And then they really banned the reading. And not only did they banned the reading of slaves, they banned even the slaves having Bibles because of the revolt.
Here's what the blacks did about 150 years ago. They humbled themselves. They prayed. They sought God's face and they turned from their wicked ways, and God.
Stop. What wickedness did they do? What wickedness were they repenting for in their chains, in their slavery? What wickedness were they repenting of?
Made slavery illegal through several white presidents, right?
So you notice, again, this is the mentality right here, right? So the black slaves, they had to humble themselves, and then when they prayed, white Jesus sent white people to free them. Is that the history that he's telling? Aren't you skipping over 600,000 dead soldiers that fought in the Civil War over slavery? All right, I just wanted to get a taste of this, because here's the thing. A lot of white Christians think like that moron. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment.